Welcome to Aspect Art. Today we're in Leiden. We're at the Rijksmuseum of Oud-Heiden for an exhibition called The Pharos of the Sun. Even as we enter the 21st century, we find ourselves still fascinated by the ancient Egyptian civilization. This exhibition is proof of that. Now, the Empire of the Nile was ruled by legendary pharaohs. Through the ages, the pharaohs cherished traditions that preserved the character of their culture intact for nearly 3,000 years. Religion, of course, was a constant and pervasive factor in the society of the pharaohs. It also determined the form of their art. For a brief period in its 3,000 years, Egyptian history followed a different course. Around 1350 BC, ancient Egypt underwent a revolution. Suddenly, the worship of many gods was replaced by that of one god, the solar deity Aton, represented as a sun disk. Now, the Egyptian capital was even transferred to the Middle Egypt. The Egyptian artists broke with the traditional rules and strove for a much higher degree of realism than had existed ever before. Now, this revolution was the work of a man who sat, of course, on the Egyptian throne at the time. This pharaoh called himself Akhenaton, he who makes himself useful to Aton. The pharaoh, his beautiful wife Nefertiti, and his 6 daughters were worshipped as well as Aton. Now, Akhenaton could be called a genius, or he could be called a madman. Was he one of these strange religious reformers, these guys that are somewhat over the top, that change everything in the name of their belief system? Or was he really a genius? Did he bring about a revolution that, in fact, altered the contiguous flow of Egyptian history? Well, this exhibition addresses some of those problems. It looks very much at how the art changed. It seeks to explain what the role of the beautiful and powerful Queen Nefertiti might have been. And it even goes into the enigma of Tutankhamun, the child who became king and who, during his reign, undid the revolution of Akhenaton. Well, these are some of the subjects that this exhibition deals with. Now, the time-hollowed civilization of the Egyptians, Akhenaton and his consort, the beautiful Nefertiti, the royal couple that broke with old tradition, and Tutankhamun, the young son and successor of Akhenaton, who undid the life's work of his father and restored Egypt to its traditional ways. Well, these are part of the view that is expressed through the art here. Now, the other thing I can say about this exhibition is that unlike many Egyptian exhibitions which have traded in gold and glitter and sensationalism, this one presents some of the most extraordinary works of art. In fact, as you look around, many of these items on display, I would say, have to be considered among the greatest works of art in the history of art. That's how extraordinary they are. Now, this exhibition was originally curated and organized by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which was the first to present it. Now, the National Museum of Antiquities here in Leiden is the only European museum to present the exhibition. Now, this is one of those exhibitions which is, of course, very popular, so I would recommend that you come to it early, and that, you might have to wait a bit, but I would say also that the wait will be worthwhile, because some of these objects are so transcendingly beautiful that you'll probably never see anything quite like it again. Now, this exhibition will be going through February, through the 18th. And of course, it's in the Rijksmuseum of Oudheiden, and that's in Rappenberg, 28. And I would suggest that any of you with an interest in either classical art, Egyptian antiquities, or just a really great exhibition, make your way to Leiden and check this one out. So from Aspect Art, this is a very recommended exhibition, and I hope you make it out there. Robert, we're here at the Allard Pearson for your new exhibition about Egypt. Could you tell us a little about what it is about?
Yes, this time are no monkeys or mummies, but we show a very interesting aspect of late Egyptian culture, which has a high degree of actuality, in the sense that we show the Roman presence in Egypt in antiquity, which means that foreigners, Romans, came to Egypt, mastered the country, were the occupying power. At the same time, the Egyptians were living there. There were Syrians living there. Jews were living there. So it was a multicultural society. And that's why I say that in a certain sense it has a degree of actuality. Like in Amsterdam nowadays, different people from different cultures with their own traditions all come together and have to live together. They have no choice, and there is a kind of play between powers, where in this case Romans are those who hold the power, but the others are there too. Now you may ask, when started all this? Well, it started exactly in 30 BC. In the year 30 BC, Queen Cleopatra, the last of the Greek dynasty that ruled for another 300 years over Egypt, died, and the Romans took over. Roman soldiers were sent to Alexandria and to Egypt, and from that moment on, from 30 BC till 641 AD, the Romans were in Egypt. It only ended when the Islam took over in Egypt, and Egypt became an Islamic country as it is now. So for 8 centuries, Roman power ruled in Egypt, but Egypt went on as it had always done from the 4th millennium BC. It built temples. It venerated old Egyptian gods. The Nile was there with its flow and fertility-bringing activity, and this kind of mixture of cultures, old traditions and new relationship with foreign powers. That's what we show in this exhibition, showing antiquities, marble objects, but stone objects, terracotta, gold, all these kind of things.
Under the Roman influence, did the Egyptian religion alter or change, or the manner in which they portrayed the gods?
Yeah, well, that's your question is very much to the point. You know, religion, the old Egyptian religion was the binding element in the old Egyptian society. The old gods, the sun god and the others. When the Romans came, the old Egyptian religion continued to exert its fascination. And one of the most remarkable things about late Egypt is that the old Egyptian religion was so strong and so fascinating for the newcomers that they converted themselves. Roman soldiers had themselves mummified like Egyptians, and they were buried as Egyptians. Egyptian temples were built by the Roman emperors, Hadrian and the others, and if you're not really an expert, you can't say whether such a temple is from 1500 BC or from the 2nd century AD. So this cult of the Egyptian gods continued, and there are many archaeological relicts which show it. On the other hand, there is a development, and for instance, the cult of the sacred animals is a remarkable phenomenon which increased in size and importance during the Roman occupation. Let's take the example of the crocodile. The crocodile is every crocodile in Egypt is a living image of the god Sobek, a very powerful god, and this god was highly venerated, and the crocodiles were mummified. So what we have found is literally thousands and thousands of mummified crocodiles from the Roman period. You could visit them. Yes, you could go to the sanctuary where they were in their basins. You could buy with the guardians. You could buy nice pieces of bread and cakes and things and all that in order to give them to the god, the living crocodile. And when the crocodile died, they would mummify him. And in the exhibition, we have several heads of crocodiles mummified and packed, so to say, in plaster. Their heads modeled in plaster, the eyes painted, and so on. Very curious kind of thing. Other animals too were venerated, but the crocodile is a very exceptional case of where the god was, apparently very important for the people. Foreigners, Romans and others, who came to Egypt as tourists. First they went to Alexandria, and then they went all the way along the Nile to visit. Were deeply moved and fascinated by this animal cult. So they didn't take it very seriously, but it was there. So they also went to visit the sanctuaries and bought also their cakes and pieces of bread and gave it to the crocodiles, like we go to the zoo here in Amsterdam, to Artis.
Now tell me, did the Roman culture itself, for example, fashion and style of that, have an effect on the Egyptians? Now, the Egyptians for centuries had been very style conscious, very much into beauty. And did the Roman culture have an influence?
No doubt there has been a certain influence. But then, which kind of Romans would you see in Egypt? In Egypt, most of them were Roman soldiers, auxiliary troops, That's to say, they were drawn from the different parts of the Roman Empire. They could come from actual Austria or Hungary, from England, to do their military service in Egypt. They were living in camp. They wore their uniforms. Their language was their own native language. Their official language was Latin. They had no women. The Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry. So if they had relationships with women, they had them with Egyptian women. It's only at the end of the 2nd century these kind of relationships were official, and children were not considered anymore as bastards, but as official little Roman children. But that, as far as the Roman part is concerned, for the rest, they wouldn't see much of the Romans, except for a bit of money. What they would see was Egyptian things. They would see the old Egyptian traditions, and so it mixes all together. And the Roman styles are not very, very prominent. You can detect it, particularly in the hairdresses that seem to be related to the hair, the coiffure, how do you call that, of the Roman empresses. And they knew those from the Roman coins where these empresses are represented.
Now, preceding the Romans, the Greeks, as you pointed out, occupied Egypt and obviously influenced it, built the city of Alexandria. They had a lot of athletics as part of their culture.
Yeah.
Did this continue through the Roman period, who seemed to go into the more gory gladiator sports later on? Did either of these have any effect on the Egyptians?
Yes, it did continue. The problem for the Greeks in Egypt was, at the moment when the Romans took over, that a number of Greek families had been in Egypt for 300 years, for 5 generations. Now, if you had been living, being American, but you had been living for 5 generations in Japan, you would consider Japan your country, because your father, your grandfather, and so on, they were all born there. You would be part of that society, but you would also have kept certain American traditions. Taking certain kind of breakfast, the Greeks went on doing their athletics. They went to the theater. Both athletics and the theater are essentially the structure of a town. There should be a theater, otherwise it was not a town. And in Roman time, this continued. This went on, and the Romans in Egypt adapted more or less. Now, your question about the circuses and all that, yes, indeed, the circuses became extremely popular, and particularly in Alexandria. It was Alexandria, with more than 1 million inhabitants, was one of the very large cities of the old world, with Rome and Antiochia, and there the circuses were extremely well frequented, and everybody knew exactly the names of the gladiators, and then there were the races. The races was the top and all that, and fractions were dressed in different colors, blue and white and green and red, and everybody would bet on one or another famous sportsman to win, and they were venerated. They got their own statues and so on. So that element from outside Egypt became extremely important. Extremely important.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for talking with us today about the Roman influence on Egypt and vice versa.
Yeah, thank you very much for just paying attention to this marvelous exhibition.